Well, good morning, everybody. How are we all doing? Good? The fight back starts here, right? Isn't that the idea? So let's talk about what that fight back might look like. My name's Mark Littlewood. I'm the Director of Popular Conservatism. Our aim is to make conservatism popular again and the Conservative Party conservative again. I've spent a good amount of my time over the last year or so touring the country, speaking to anyone who will listen to us, from the Conservatives, from Reform, independent groups as well, with this great man on my left, who I consider to be the greatest and most influential Conservative public intellectual in the UK today. And I think his ideas can change the way our country is governed. And he certainly really sharpened and helped my thinking. So, David, it's fantastic to be with you. And I'm going to fire some questions at you to try and tease out some analysis and some prescription. Because I would imagine everybody in this room today and in the wider conservative small c movement realizes that things have gone badly wrong in Britain. You can see it, you can smell it, the day-to-day consequences of it are completely obvious. So there's a sense that things have gone wrong, but perhaps not a great clarity about why, even though you can see the effects of it. You know, that the economy's sluggish, that the state grows ever stronger, that it's harder and harder to make a living, that justice doesn't seem to be being done. So people see a whole array of problems and realize there's some aggregate problem behind it. And I buy into your theory, the Starkey thesis, about what it is. So could you begin, David, by telling us what the underlying cause of our country's present woes is, in your view?
I think the important thing is to realize that it's not, as you've said just now, a series of discrete, separate problems in the economy, in justice, in immigration. It's not the result of the fact that we have now 6 going on 7 prime ministers in 10 years, though actually that is a fundamental symptom of what's gone wrong. The big argument that I want to make, and it makes it both harder and easier for that third stage when we come to solutions, is that something has gone wrong fundamentally and systemically. And I want to use a word that's an awkward word, and we all think it's got too many syllables, a bit like homosexual, constitution. And we need to get back the idea that the constitution of a country is like the constitution of an individual. Once it goes wrong, you go wrong, and you go wrong fundamentally. In other words, a constitution isn't a bit of written paper. Well, it might be, but it's something fundamental. It's a kind of DNA. And what happened from 1997 onwards, under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, was a fundamental change in the way we were governed. And that change was incomplete because it represented the overlaying of a new set of values on an old way of doing things. So we have a government at war with itself that is fighting itself. The foundation, why we're here, why we're British, why we are conservative, why until very recently Britain had this reputation, and it's a shameful thing to admit, of not merely a great empire, but the best governed country in the world. We pioneer the idea of representative government, the idea of parliament itself. And this was the core, going right back to Magna Carta in the 13th century. That fundamental idea is not democracy. Democracy is the final stage of it. But it's that idea that the governors, those up there, answer to the governed, us down here. And that, in its last form, it's the principle of parliamentary sovereignty, which doesn't just mean a collection of MPs prancing around like John Bercow and Dominic Grieve. Parliamentary sovereignty is your sovereignty. It's the sovereignty of the British people. Blair hated that. Brown hated that even more. And instead, they model us, they remodel us as a kind of strange parody of America on the one hand and Germany after the new German constitution following the Second World War on the other. And the fundamental principle stands democracy on its head. Democracy becomes liberal democracy, which means the exact opposite of what democracy does. Democracy is the rule of the majority. Liberal democracy, in this extraordinary parody that Blair and Brown believed in and the European Union believes in, is the protection of minorities against the majority. It's the turning of the whole thing upside down. And you do it by means of two extraordinary shifts of power. You first of all remove power from anybody who's answerable to the electorate. That's ministers, the Prime Minister, the MPs, towards experts. These extraordinary bodies of experts known as quangos, quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organizations. I think you did the arithmetic. It's something like 440...
well, according to Liz Truss, who is always right about everything, of course.
Especially when numbers are involved.
Especially when numbers are involved. It's 444 quangos, expert bodies, in charge of a third of all government expenditure. 444's easy to remember, isn't it? So it's about that number. I wish it was 666. That would be even easier to remember. But 444 is a roundabout guess.
And the point is, all astonishingly fundamental choices about public policy are handed over to people who are deliberately not answerable to you. This is the whole point about them. So the setting of interest rates and so on, well, you could sort of make a case for that. But you see, the fundamental problem is you should not give direct power to experts. You want advice from experts, but they should not take the decisions. The politician should take the decisions, those who are answerable to you. We saw it most clearly with COVID. There you have a group of people. Remember, this sort of echoes Plato, the idea of the philosopher kings. And you remember, we were ruled by a committee called SAGE, the Scientific Advisory Committee, which, okay, it had a purpose, to make sure nobody dies of COVID. It didn't care if you died of a heart attack. You were positively welcome if you died of cancer. You remember, the entire NHS was closed down and turned into a national COVID service. They didn't care if they destroyed the education of 3 generations of school children. They didn't care if they bankrupted the country by incurring costs of furlough, which were those of a moderately large war. From which, this is the problem with the rule of the expert. And Churchill and Theodore Roosevelt, two of the greatest 20th century politicians, have this perfect phrase: you want your scientists, your experts on tap, but not on top. We have them on top, and we have them everywhere. The other thing is we send power to judges. And again, judges are extremely good at arbitrating between individuals, but not between the individual and the common interest. That is, nor in cases that involve the expenditure of public money.
Right.
But by bizarre means, we've given power over the public purse to judges. We've actually given judges, thanks to the Equality Act, and the clauses in the Equality Act which relate to wage payments to groups that are primarily women, as opposed to other groups of workers who are primarily men. We give judges the power to set wages irrespective of the market rate, thanks to the idiot decision of Theresa May to go for legislate or quasi-legislate net zero by 2050. Judges determine fuel policy, they determine energy policy, they determine whether you can frack.
So, David,
Right.
I want to see if I've got this right, and these are the examples are always very useful, that you're saying what essentially happened, perhaps by stealth, or if not by stealth, that we were unaware of, was that from the rise of Blair, but then perpetuated under the Conservative...
And doubled down.
And doubled down on by the Conservative...
Deeply doubled down on.
That what we did was to take power away from the democratically elected parliament.
Absolutely.
in large chunks and hand this over to 444 quangos who will decide, whether you need to have a bat tunnel on HS2 or a fish disco by a nuclear power station.
And you must spend 100 million on the bat tunnel. And as I point out, you could have built 3 bat Ritzes and given each bat a butler for that kind of price, and 600 million on the fish disco to stop fish feeling mildly uncomfortable outside Sizewell C nuclear power station. This is insane.
Yeah. So these guys get a whole load of chunk of power, which is now, organised by the Fish Quango or the Environment Agency, the Bat Preservation
English
Agency, English Nature, all of the rest of it, to add even greater costs to the absolute obscenity of whatever public infrastructure projects being built. I'm always fond of comparing infrastructure projects. I think the Indian government spent £100 million getting an unmanned flight to Mars, and we're spending £100 billion not getting to Mars, but getting to Birmingham. So it was already a pretty expensive project, but it's rendered even more expensive when these quangos have their way. And then the other part that we've given away is to the judges, who are now determining, because of the Human Rights Act, because of the Equality Act, because of net zero legislation, are essentially making political decisions, drill or not drill. Should this person be allowed to stay in the country or not?
Expenditure of money.
Expenditure of money, what benefits you're entitled to. So although to the, at first blush, it looks like Parliament hasn't changed very much. We've still got 650 MPs. We still go along and vote, often much more than every 5 years. But you're saying it's sort of become a Potemkin Parliament. The power isn't there in the way that it was 30 or so years ago. It's been given away to the judges and the experts. That is what's gone wrong. Am I right?
That is exactly what's happened. But the whole point of this, ladies and gentlemen, is government now fights itself. So you have English Nature on the one hand. You have got a railway authority that's trying to build HS2. They're fighting each other. The state fights itself. Nothing happens, which is why nothing happens. But it also means nobody is responsible.
Responsibility is spread so thinly that nobody carries it.
It is so thinly that and again, you can't hold a judge to account. You can't hold an expert quango to account quite deliberately. So we've got this, we've replaced a system of government which had a very high degree of accountability, thanks to elections and whatever, with a system of government that has got no degree, fundamentally, of accountability, which means, of course, ministers take the rap, but can't actually do anything. Which is why I think fundamentally we've seen the astonishing development of the last week or two, in which a government which is returned with an overwhelming majority within 2 years collapses, having been able really to do anything at all. And we're seeing this pattern repeat itself and repeat itself and repeat itself. And interestingly, I predicted this with Starmer. You can actually go online and you can on my YouTube channel and you can see exactly my prediction on the day that he was elected. And the other peculiar thing about Starmer, and we haven't talked about this, there's also another very ugly side of all of this, which is as the state stops working, the control of public opinion becomes more and more important. And Starmer presented himself, what was the phrase he used? Chief prosecutor. A sort of phrase that should send shivers up your spine, imposing a kind of public view, a publicly accepted set of opinions on climate change, on race relations, on immigration, and all the rest of it. Something completely alien to what we've been. So we've a form of government that doesn't work, but is also sort of, it's not even passive-aggressive, it's highly aggressive against the majority. And there's another final thing, which is what I think many of us find most distressing of all. Not simply government doesn't work, it's actually lost any sense that there's a thing called the national interest, that there really is a nation state, that we've got frontiers worth defending. And again, we need to be clear where the blame lies. It lies centrally in something that sounds wonderful and cuddly, universal human rights. If you believe in universal human rights, you cannot be a conservative. A conservative is fundamentally a nationalist. You believe in your nation. If you believe in universal human rights, you believe in a universal human being. You don't believe in history. You don't believe in culture. You believe that an Afghani refugee, once you've taken his AK-47 away and swabbed him down a bit, will be down at the pub and the old, knocking back a half pint and playing whist in the evenings. And we know this is not true, but this is the myth of universal human rights.
Okay, now, so I think that's a brilliant summary of what the problem is, David, that we have given away powers to expert committees and judges. The politicians aren't really in control. They're there to take the rap, so we can expect to be burning through prime ministers at the sort of rate that Italy was back in the 1970s and 1980s, and have become almost as dysfunctional as Italy in the 1970s and 80s, where the famous line was, if the motherland called in to the ambassador in Rome, whether it was the American ambassador, the British ambassador, the capital city calls and always asks for an explanation on what's the situation like in Italy. The answer always came, the situation is disastrous, but not serious. And it seems to me that we're in a position where our politics has become disastrous.
Giggling as we go beneath the waves,
yes,
with Count Binface.
Yeah, exactly. So here's the thing, right? I think a lot of people who buy into that, even if they don't understand all of the details of it, but basically buy into the system is broken, are calling for a revolution of some sort. Burn it all down. We've got to start again, raise everything to the ground. Everything's broken. Let's get some gigantic skips and put all of this stuff in it and sort of take to the streets. I'm not necessarily suggesting they want a violent revolution, but a complete restart for the United Kingdom. You have cautioned very strongly against such an approach. So my question to you is, how do we fix this without that sort of big bang revolution and storming the gates of the palaces of Westminster?
Well, I think we do need an element of big bang, but I want to distinguish it from, as it were, the concentration of events. If we have, which we desperately hope we will have, an incoming Conservative government that really is conservative, and before we come off this platform, I want to offer you a serious working definition of what that would mean. They will have to have a seriously prepared legislative program ready to go on day one, the moment they go into Downing Street, and unless they do, they will fail. Even Trump, with all of those executive orders already there, failed because he had not worked out a legislative program for Congress to actually embed it.
In his first term or his second?
His second term. Even they were just executive orders. They are temporary instruments. He had not worked out a program with Congress. And indeed, the last president who actually carried a serious program in Congress, you've got to go back to the 1960s and Lyndon B. Johnson is the last president capable of doing that. But we are very fortunate in Britain. If Parliament recovers its confidence, it is sovereign and it can pass the necessary legislation. And what I'm suggesting we do is not have a revolution, but do what we did in 1660 or 1689. We have a restoration. We undo this alien legislation. We repeal the lot. I call it the Great Repeal Act. The Human Rights Act would go. The Constitutional Reform Act would go. The Constitutional Reform and Governance Act. The abolition of the Lord Chancellor. The Supreme Court. The lot. Because it's a self-reinforcing machinery. And if you tried, for example, as some people propose, the Conservative Party at the moment, for instance, you just repeal the Human Rights Act, the Supreme Court would strike it down.
Yep.
It's as simple as that. So you've got to have a great repeal, a restoration, an undoing, a going back to that fundamental principle. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a solution. And it's really important to understand I am not offering a solution. What I am doing is saying, unless you do that, no incoming Conservative government will be allowed to do anything at all.
And just to be clear, you're using Conservative in the broadest possible sense.
I'm using
it. Could be a reform government, could be a coalition.
I'm using it as a small c, but with a serious meaning. Conservative government, absolutely. A government of the right. Let's put it like that. But if you don't undo the Blairite structure, the deep machinery of the state, and you sound like a conspiracy theorist. I'm not. This is a serious, carefully considered understanding of what's happened now. And until it's undone, you can do nothing. What is striking is, even at moments, Starmer, when he talked about the warm bath of complacency in the civil service, understood this. Rishi Sunak, his columns in the Sunday Times business section are really interesting. He actually reflected on Rwanda, and he said the mistake we made was not to change the law. Or, remember, woke is embedded in law. That's why it sticks. And until you change the law, you can't do anything. But the enormous advantage of our Constitution and the still lingering element of sovereignty in Parliament, if you've got a programme, if you've got a Prime Minister, if you've got who is able enough, if you've got a majority which is big enough, if you've argued your case clearly before you're elected, if your manifesto is clear, you can do this.
Yeah.
You must do this. Otherwise, there will be no point. It will be the final disaster of Britain.
This is so interesting. So I think we've got it now. I think we've... This will be an oversimplified way to look at it, David. And I know Ronald Reagan was saying there may be no easy solutions, but there are simple solutions. We're sort of saying if the UK's constitution was a computer, was a PC, that we go into the settings and we reset it all to something like March 1997, whilst making sure that the EU app remains off the computer. But we
removed.
And not just, yes, completely deleted from the computer. So we reset our constitutional settings to roughly where they were in the mid-1990s, there or thereabouts.
Worked. You see, one of the things that's really striking is, if you look at the great resets we've had, when Thatcher comes in 79, when Blair comes in 1997, government proved capable of reversing direction. The civil service and whatever proved capable of reversing direction dramatically, and took pride in it. Now we see government that simply can't, from 2010 onwards, that's just revolved in circles. I mean, it's just, it's like an idling motor.
Yes, it just can't get anything done.
It can't get anything done.
So I mentioned at the top of the show that you and I have been going around talking to large numbers of Conservative associations, reform branches, going to party conferences, speaking to independent groups like the New Culture Forum and so on and so forth. Is this message getting through? Because we can't wish this into existence. At some point, we are going to need, let's presume 2029, a party or a combination of parties to explicitly run on this manifesto, not as an afterthought, not buried into Appendix 12, but to be very clear that they're going to do it and to win a mandate for that, whether that's Reform, Conservative, some amalgam, whatever. We're not particularly partisan about these matters, just want it done. How do you think it's going there? Has the penny dropped with the leadership of either party, with the grassroots of either party? Is this going to be, are you a lighthouse in a desert? Or do you think that the penny is...
Lighthouse in a desert is a funny idea. I thought it was in the sea, but never mind.
Well, quite. A lighthouse in the sea would be useful and direct the traffic. If you're a lighthouse in a desert, you would be, you would still be shining light, but to no apparent value.
To no purpose.
So, are you shining light to no apparent purpose, or do you think we're beginning to make a change in the thinking of the parties of the right?
I think we are beginning. I mean, there are very clear signs. The fact that the Conservative Party commissioned the report by Lord Wolfson, the Shadow Attorney General, on the Human Rights Act, and came to the conclusion it had to be reversed. That you could not bring immigration, you couldn't bring our frontiers, a whole series of other things would be absolutely impossible if it remained on the statute book. And what's even more striking is, you haven't, Kemi Badenoch simply hasn't had this as a policy that is nice. She has required all existing MPs to sign up to it, and very strikingly, even Tom Bingham's son-in-law, Jesse Norman, and Tom Bingham is one of the former law lord, one of the key figures in this extraordinary, I think, elephantiasis of law, has signed up to it, and she's now enforcing it. Mm-hmm. You saw Theresa May's former chief of staff, Gavin Barwell, drummed out of the Conservative Party. We will know it's true when the whip is withdrawn from Theresa May. That until, and I would withdraw it from David Cameron as well. The absolute perversion of conservatism, the infusion of the party with liberal ideas, and worst of all, under Theresa May, the denunciation of the party. Can you imagine a party leader calling their own party the nasty party? The sheer folly. So there are signs of things changing.
And on the reform side
just
of the
one second, not on a broad enough front.
Right.
So they've with the Equality Act, they've decided to repeal the one section which is the public sector equality duty, but the entire machinery would remain in place.
Right.
So the nonsense of judges setting wages, the extraordinary war between gender and women, but this is the problem with human rights law, when you come up with separate group rights rather than the traditional universal negative rights of life, liberty, and property, which we as conservatives believe in. You set up group after group that fight each other. So the conservatives are getting there. Reform, in the person of Danny Kruger, who is responsible for this area, is there completely, and has spoken eloquently and forcefully on this, and has started to consider the actual detail of implementation. And if we want to go on and look at the wilder shores of Restore, Restore is called Restore because the founder of it, Rupert Lowe, was so impressed by my idea of a restoration that he borrowed it for the name of his party. So there we are. Now, whether...
You should have just called it the Starkey Party. It's a catchier name, right?
Yeah. That would save of, how could I put this, a cult of personality, which is entirely remote from me. Yes, right.
So that sounds like some sort of good progress, but as you say, they haven't necessarily bought into the whole tapestry. They're still looking at, let's go through the Equality Act line by line and the Human Rights Act line by line and the Net Zero commitment line by line, rather than batching it all together. But you think there's a seismic, we could get a seismic shift if we learned a bit more from an important historical conservative figure. Tell us a little bit about that. You think if we look back to the thinking, and perhaps even the actions, but the thinking and the speeches of Benjamin Disraeli, he might actually be shining the light and explaining the way to get there, how to distinguish between folly and common sense. Is that right? Because that sounds a little quirky to look back to a Victorian-era politician as our potential saviour, but why is Disraeli worthy of study in addressing our present ills?
I think the important thing is that we've to remember, fundamentally, conservatism begins in defeat. This is a very difficult thing to admit, but the outstanding original conservative thinker, who is Edmund Burke, his reflections on the revolution in France, it's that revolution. And that revolution in France is, in a dramatic way, everything that Blair tried to do in Britain. It's the attempt at the replacing of a historic way of governing by a series of abstract, systematic, apparently reasonable devices, in the same way, you know, the revolution decided the French equivalent of feet and inches all had to be reduced to tens, which sounds fine with measuring, but unfortunately they also wanted to do it with the calendar. They wanted to do it with the time of day.
Yeah.
In other words, nature had to be forced to submit to 10, even if it didn't divide very readily into 10. Disraeli learns from that, and Disraeli is a symbol. All of you will know the idea of the Tory wets, that Disraeli is great novel Sybil, the two nations is the foundation of one nation conservatism, which is, well, it's quite as kind of wet as we all are now in this hyper-sweaty weather that's going on. This is a complete misreading of Disraeli.
This is important. He's not what we would mean today as a one-nation Tory.
He is
by
not
what we mean the West.
absolutely. Disraeli is passionately opposed to that kind of thinking. And it's really important we get him right, because he doesn't just write novels on this stuff. He writes and delivers carefully reflective speeches, and the speeches define. He is the person who is the first great conservative thinker in British political history, and he's the first great conservative leader. He's not our greatest prime minister. And what he does, he distinguishes, and this is why it's so useful, why it addresses directly the debate we're having now, why it justifies what Kemi Badenoch did with Gavin Barwell. He actually says conservatism and liberalism are eternal enemies. And that's what we need to understand. And he puts it like this. And he does it again in a very, very interesting and subtle way. In his great 1867 speech, after he's given the vote to my ancestors, because I, ladies and gentlemen, am also the son of a toolmaker. He did a much, much better job, but that's an entirely different matter. The skilled working class were given the vote in 1867. Disraeli justifies it as follows. And it's, again, it's a great paradox of being British, English, whatever. We are both the most progressive country in the world. We invent modernity. The modern world is invented here in London, quite simply. And even near it, here in Greenwich, actually, if you go and look in the Great Hall just down the road, as opposed to these monstrous buildings here, you have some of the greatest buildings in England, and the Painted Hall, the English Sistine Chapel, shows you all these ideas at work. But what Disraeli begins by saying, in a progressive country, Britain, change is inevitable. And what's interesting, the Oxford Dictionary of Quotations stops the quotation there. In other words, it makes Disraeli David Cameron. So even the dictionaries...
It makes him look pro-change.
It makes him just look indiscriminately pro-change. But what he says is something completely different. The question is not whether you change, it's what sort of change. Do you change in accordance with the traditions, the customs, and the practices of the country? Because Disraeli is absolutely clear that the Conservative Party is a national party or it's nothing. We have to have this idea of the nation as the center. And that, of course, rules out liberalism. Because he then says, do you do this, change in accordance with the tradition, customs, and whatever of the country, or in accordance with universal, abstract, cosmopolitan, liberal principles? And that's exactly what we've had forced on us, what the Conservative Party itself adopted since the 1940s. And we've got to learn it has been disastrous at home and abroad. And we have to have the intellectual confidence to undo it. And until we do, we will be lost and our country will be lost.
Yeah, David, thank you. David, I find that so fascinating, and under your tutelage, I've started reading around Disraeli as well, that it perfectly encapsulates actually the division in modern politics.
It is totally.
Cosmopolitan liberals and the conservatives.
This is written in the 1860s. Yeah. And again, one of the striking things about great political thinkers is they have the edge of prophecy. In the same way, Churchill with the Fulton, Missouri speech. You know, saw what was going to happen with the Iron Curtain coming down over Europe. By the way, he'd had a considerable responsibility for the fact that the Iron Curtain was going to come down, but he still foresaw the consequences. And similarly, Disraeli, similarly Edmund Burke, all of them, Jeremy Bentham, when he's talking about universal human rights, they have this gift of prophecy. And it's something that we have... That we should draw on. We should also, again, if you look at what was so wrong with Blair, it was the contempt for Britain. It was the idea that history was fuddy-duddy. That I call it the Ratnerization of our politics. We replaced these magnificent, remember, history is not dead. It's a fertile soil. What Blair did, he tore things up by the roots and said, oh, isn't it pretty? You know, you wash them and sort of put them on a specimen page. And then you're astonished when they withered and died.
Now, David, we're right on the clock. We're right on the clock. But I
shall shut up.
I want to finish with, we're going to run over just by a few seconds. What should people in this room do? You and I have gone round propounding this case to anyone who will listen. You run a great YouTube channel, David Starkey Talks. I will put in an ad for my outfit, Popular Conservatism. It's non-partisan, or at least ecumenical. Please join us. We run online events. We have a regular bulletin promoting these ideas and encourage people to spread them. But what needs to be done by people in this room, other than agreeing with you and applauding, what actively can they do to make sure this change happens in 2029?
I think the essential thing is that people read up about it, look on program. There's a huge amount of it now online. There'll be more online when my Substack gets up and running, which we will be doing very shortly, and talk to people about it. One of the things we have conservatives, and again, it's conservative with a big, small c, we've been terrible. We've let the left control public discourse. We've got to reclaim the public sphere. And thanks to Elon Musk, thanks to the taking down of the left-wing monopoly on Twitter, we have the media. We have the new media. Use it. Persuade your neighbors. Because I get, and Mark and I think would agree, we've been traveling around enormously. There is a real appetite for political discussion. People are aware, everybody virtually is aware something has gone wrong, that it needs putting right. And I think that there is a willingness now to talk about it. You've got the job. You're the cadres. You're the leaders. Go away. We use religious language, that this is evangelism. Go out and convert, and then we might stand a chance.
There's a challenge for you, ladies and gentlemen. Go out and convert. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Dr. David Starkey.